Oh, hi guys, good morning. Buongiorno. I feel I'm coming home because last year here in Titignano was one of the first times after my book, The Cosmic Hologram, was published that I shared it with folks. And it was so wonderful and so lovely to be with everybody last year. So I'm back. And quite a lot's happened that I'll share a little bit with you. First of all, the book won a Silver Nautilus Award for Science and Cosmology, which means that its message is really getting out there, which is great. It's now published in Italian as well. And for some reason best known to themselves, it's in Turkish. Maybe a message to President Erdogan, I don't know. But anyway, so we'll see. So the message is getting out and more evidence is accumulating for its perspective of unified reality and unity expressed through diversity. And that feels very important as I'll share. I'm in conversation with you guys, with all of us this afternoon. So this afternoon, I'd really love us to explore what this means for us. Not just understanding this, but what does it mean by experiencing unity and diversity? What does it mean about us embodying it? What does it do in terms of how it could transform and heal our fragmented perspectives? And since it's our beliefs that drive our behaviors, what might this be in terms of a potential game changer? It's evidence as a potential game changer in how we behave. And I'm talking collectively here, with ourselves, with each other, with our beloved Mother Earth, with the wider cosmos, because this could be one of those change moments for all of us collectively. So the last year I've been more and more spending time in going around and sharing its message, but primarily linking up folks who get it and want to actually support this understanding of, instead of separation in the world, link up and come from that place of unity expressed in radical diversity and abundance. So this morning is a run through of some ideas and a bit of evidence that we can go on to explore and share this afternoon. Okay, so welcome to the whole world view of unified reality. As I mentioned, this is based on evidence. I wanted to write this book over 60 years ago because I was experiencing reality in the way that its message shares. But the evidence was just not there. The scientific evidence was just not there. And it really wasn't there until the last few years. So this is its time for the message. It's literally one of those things, a time whose idea has come, or an idea whose time has come. Because this is not new. This is ancient. This is ancient. I talk about Indra's net in the book. And Indra's net is a description of reality that the ancient Indian sages described millennia ago. The Greeks described this. All spiritual traditions at their deepest, mystical, most embodied and experienced perspective describe reality in this way. That separation is a myth, that ultimately reality is unified, that mind and matter are not separate, that mind is primary and expresses itself as matter and energy and space and time, that consciousness isn't something we have, it literally is what we and the whole world are. So this is now bringing forward the evidence that supports science and non-duality. Yes! We know that in our body, every cell of our body is significant. We have differentiated cells. We come from undifferentiated stem cells. But when we mature into a body, our cells take up different properties, but they all work together in a coherent way. Nothing is wasted. Everything is required to make our template of consciousness able to exist, evolve, experience, explore, evolve as a coherent entity. Nothing's redundant. Nothing's by accident. We now know, and I'm really skipping through this, and we can go into more detail anytime you guys would like, and there's some papers here that do give the sort of the science of this, but we now know that we are like a cluster of cells in the body of the universe. And we have meaning, and we have purpose, and we have an impact on the whole. One of the things that I brought forward in the book is something I call the physics of evolution, explaining how our universe not only exists, but evolves as a unified entity. And crucially, all the informational instructions were there from the get-go, 13.8 billion years ago, in terms of how the laws of physics, which we can restate as algorithms, as instructions on showing it's the operating system for how our universe exists and evolves. But that evolutionary impulse from simplicity to complexity, from the deepest level of simplicity to ever greater levels of self-awareness and individuated levels of self-awareness, is intrinsic, it is innate, it is the beingness of our universe, it is the doingness of our universe. Now, science has moved on from originally being the perception of separate objects, and then 100 years ago with quantum physics and relativity showing that energy, matter are more like vibrations and excitations than things, and that space and time, each of themselves, are relative to an observer, but we have to click them together as space-time, which is not relative, which is invariant, because if we don't do that, our universe could not exist. The laws of physics would not exist. E would not equal mc squared, and we wouldn't be sitting in this room, okay? So when we need to understand that, then a lot flows from that. But what we're now finding, all of those really, even with the clues of quantum physics, most mainstream scientists were still saying, you know, our world, the physical realm, is full of separate objects, and consciousness isn't what we are. It's something that's evolved through accident and meaningless possibilities through the last 13.8 billion years. And so we've, as my friend Irvin Laszlo said, we've disenchanted reality. And especially when, again, mainstream science has said pretty much that this physical realm's all there is. As I think Mark was up yesterday, Mark Gober, who's written a new book. Yeah, I know he's not here now. But Mark, you know, literally has written about a universe and literally upside down. That what science has told us is literally 180 degrees upside down from what science is now at the leading edge actually starting to realize and reveal, which is that instead of that separation, all we call reality is interconnected, and even more fundamentally than being interconnected, that is ultimately unified. As I said, mind doesn't somehow arise from matter. Matter is an expression of mind. And consciousness is what we all are and what the whole world is. So let's suck it up and get on with it. We know, you know, as a cosmologist and physicist, we know that the further down we drill, tinier and tinier and tinier, that physical reality is extremely ephemeral. It's that 99.12 nines and a percentage point, no thingness. And what's left are just excitations of fields. They're relationships and vibrations. But that's still not the whole story. That's still not fundamental enough. Because what we're now realizing too is that information, the same information that's the basis of all our technologies, the same information that when we throw a beam of light on an object, we can collect information from it, we can actually project that on a two-dimensional screen as an informational pattern, we can throw another beam of light through it and project a hologram. That hologram is made up of all of the information we collected from that object and then displayed on a two-dimensional screen, okay? So all the ones, all the zeros, anything in reality can be described in terms of ones and zeros, whether it's a name, whether it's a camera, whether it's this room, whether it's us, yeah? And we now realize that that information is as physically real as anything we call energy and matter. The last few years, which has been a major breakthrough, a team led by Antoine Berroux and Eric Lutz a couple of years ago showed that when we store or delete 1 bit of digitized information, temperature and heat are involved. So if you rub your hands together, yeah, you get heat, right? That's physical, you feel it, it's real. Well, when we store or delete one bit of information, and it's nothing to do with the equipment, it's literally that information itself. If we store or delete it, heat is produced, temperature is released. You know, we now have the servers that take all of the sort of major databases, such as Google, and, you know, they actually put out more heat than the nation of Iceland. I mean, if you get into this, you'll realize just how much heat is produced by data information processing. And it's not just the friction. It is, but it's not just the friction or the equipment. It's the actual processing of the information itself. So we're now getting to a point that we're realizing that not just information is as physical as anything we call energy, matter, and indeed space-time, but it's more fundamental. And what we're actually realizing, as the ancients understood, is the appearance of our physical world emerges from deeper non-physical realms. We've known it for 100 years through quantum physics. Quantum physics can't work if there aren't non-physical realms underpinning its realities, yeah? And also our universe can't exist and evolve, and quantum physics can't work if our universe doesn't exist and evolve as a unified, ultimately non-local connected entity. But those were clues that we ignored for far too long. Now the evidence is coming through so thick and fast, we can't ignore them anymore. So just as a hologram captures, as I mentioned, information about an object and onto a two-dimensional, so 3D object to two-dimensional screen, and then projects that to create a holographic image, the digital of our technologies is exactly the same as universal digitized information that makes up all we call physical reality. It literally informs, and you notice I put a little hyphen between in and form, and that's very deliberate. This is not random data. This is patterned, relational, dynamic information that connects all of us and with the whole of our universe and informs our reality. But our universe does this in exactly the opposite way to a hologram. Our universe takes information held on the two-dimensional surface and boundary of space and projects it into what we call physical reality. So reality is real, but the appearance of three-dimensional space is holographic. And every leading edge theory and evidence is pointing in this direction of travel, and across all scales of existence and across many, many different fields of research. We are information, and we are informed by and inform the entire universe. If you think of our universe beginning 13.8 billion years ago as a baby universe, okay? Tiny little universe, as simple as it could be, but no simpler. And think of it not beginning in a big bang, which wasn't big, and it certainly was not a bang, because what do we think of when we think of bang? Yeah, what else? Bang. Explosion. It wasn't an explosion, it was ordered. Instead, it was far more like the ancient Indian sages talked about, a big breath. Yeah? It began in an incredibly ordered way, so ordered, so simple as it could be, but no simpler, that ever since then, as space has expanded and time has flowed, it's gone from that simplicity to ever greater levels of complexity. And that's because in every moment, our universe is actually embodying more and more informational content. That's how it evolves, yeah? It can exist by just thinking about energy and matter, but it evolves because space expands and time flows, because that boundary of space embodies, like a holographic film, ever more information that then is experienced and explored and learned from and evolved in what we call space-time. It's cool, isn't it? Glad you think so. I mean, I've spent 60 years, really should have got out more, so I'm glad. I'm really glad. So literally, it exists, our universe, and I say our universe very clearly, because our universe more and more is being seen as being finite and closed. Literally, a finite thought form in the infinite and eternal mind of the cosmos. So many, 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 many other universes are likely, are almost certain to exist and evolve. Maybe tiny ones, maybe huge ones, maybe minutely living for a moment, and maybe some that are vastly older than our universe. And our universe, by the way, is now looking to be sort of middle-aged, and there's good evidence for that I can talk about later if you'd like us to. But this is where all the evidence is leading. This is the direction of travel. And as I say, it's not just cosmology, it's not just physics, it's across all scales of existence and across absolutely numerous fields of research, which is what I put together in the book. Since the book came out, and there's loads and loads of evidence for this, 3 more pieces of evidence have come forward. First of all, as a cosmological test at the scale of our entire universe, a coalition of 4 universities led by Kostas Skenderis at the University of Southampton in the UK, but also Italian universities and Canada, actually looked at what's called the cosmic microwave background, which is a sort of the relic of the early era of our universe. And they've discovered the evidence for holographic patterns within the CMB. So it's there, and it's there from the very beginning. And they published a paper in January 2017 on that. We've also tested this perspective of non-locality. In other words, even though within space-time the speed of light is the limiting speed limit to share information, we also know as a requisite of quantum physics that our entire universe is interconnected non-locally as an entire entity. And we've tested that in the lab up to the scale of small diamonds. And I always say I'd love to be the person who tidies up after that experiment, because I'm sure they wouldn't miss a few. But we've actually, in February last year, a group led by General Kaiser tested non-locality out to 600 light years from Earth. What they did is they took starlight from stars 600 light years away, and they non-locally entangled it with light photons in the laboratory. That's nice, isn't it? I like that. And the other thing is that Stephen Hawking recently passed over, but posthumously, he and a Belgian cosmologist called Thomas Hertog have just published a paper, again stating their perspective and their evidence that our universe is finite and it's closed. In other words, all that I'm talking about in the Cosmic Hologram hangs together. So these pieces, but this is just growing and growing the whole time. So we're now taking on from a 20th century scientific revolution of energy fields and quantum possibilities, relative space and time, invariant space-time. We're now getting to a 21st century scientific revolution where information is reality and reality is unified. Before I go on to this very briefly, because I've got about 10 minutes left, I think. Just on that point about information is reality, this does not get us to the ground of all being. This does not get us to the no-thingness or the infinity of cosmic mind or the multidimensionality per se of our experiences. What this book tries to do is it tries to invite people who live in a world of separation and duality across a bridge into a realization that all we call reality is unified, and so to be able to turn around and come from a place of unity awareness. There's 2 more books to come. One, Gaia, Her Story, continues on from this and talks about the biography, the autobiography of our beloved Mother Earth as a living being in essential living universe. You know, from all of this, perhaps we can expand our perspectives of what is living way beyond biology. That our universe exists and evolves as a unified being, an entity of intelligence and purpose and meaning, and we are It's microcosmic co-creators. So we have innate meaning and purpose. Everything in reality that is manifest in reality has universal worth. And if it has universal worth, perhaps we can bring forward truly embodied, truly experienced universal values of inclusion and fairness and compassion. So, but this is just the start. This is trying to help people over the bridge so we can begin to move forward together, head, heart, and hands, in actually begin to really live this reality. So how is an interconnected and unified reality relevant to each and all of us? Why would it matter to someone who's a single mother, on perhaps, small income in the supermarket? Well, maybe it can directly and indirectly if she perceives that she is not alone. If she's not perhaps as lonely as she's felt, and that everything and everyone are interconnected. And maybe the strangers that pass her, if they realize this, don't just pass her by. They maybe offer her help with a buggy. They may be offering a kind word. They may go into a coffee shop and pay for a coffee for a homeless person. Tiny things that make a massive difference, and bigger things that make a massive difference. We're at a tipping point, we know that. We're collectively co-creating results that really, who would want this? And yet, my perspective is that our fragmented perspectives collectively have driven our dysfunctional behaviours. Our beliefs drive our behaviours. If we feel the world is separate, if we feel that, really at the end of the day, what's meaningful, we look after ourselves, hopefully. We look after our families, hopefully. But as Einstein said, where does the spiral of compassion end? And if it just ends there, then this happens. Yeah? So perhaps this offers us an opportunity to expand our circle, our spiral of compassion, and realize that, we can't individually probably go and clear up the whole of this, but if we just pick up the litter in our streets, near our homes, if we just don't throw away litter in the first place, if we can become social activists for one-stop plastic being a thing of the past, if we can support positive news, if we can show up and get out of the way, maybe this will be a thing of the past very, very soon. So understanding the unified nature of reality might just be the key, to consciously co-create a higher possibility. I spoke with some ETs the other day, as you do. Seriously. And these were extraterrestrial folks who had got through this pinch point in their own planetary evolutionary process. And perhaps this pinch point where we're aware enough and yet not quite aware enough to co-create something that we've just seen. How did they get beyond that? How did they survive and thrive as a species, as planetary species? And the answer I got immediately was we came to understand, experience, and embody unity awareness. It was as simple and as challenging as that. So most of us aren't conscious. I'm certainly not conscious every moment of every day, what decisions I'm making, what I'm reaching out for, what I'm choosing. But we are literally microcosmic co-creators. Whether aware or not, we have impacts on others. They have on us. Reality is fundamentally interconnected. We're finding, as I mentioned, the evidence across all scales of existence and many, many fields of research. And to give you a very few examples, a couple of years ago, 2 astrophysicists at Harvard realized that if they looked at the population densities of cities in terms of people and the population densities of galaxies in terms of stars, then cities grow and galaxies form in exactly the same way. They embody exactly the same patterns of information. We also don't, when we try and look at earthquakes, when we try and predict earthquakes, we can't. And the reason is there's no such thing as a typical earthquake. If you look at all earthquakes, we can plot them on what's called the Gutenberg-Richter Power Law, okay? So if we look at the scale of the earthquake, and then we look at the frequency, we find that the bigger the earthquake, basically, the bigger the earthquake, the less often it happens. And that's the relationship. So an earthquake that's twice as powerful happens 4 times less often. That's it. That is it. So those relationships, those dynamical relationships, play out in that way. But we also, from research that was done at the end of the Second World War by a researcher called Lewis Richardson, looking at hundreds of conflicts, and then more recently by Neil Johnson and his team at the University of Florida. And Neil looked at insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan and found exactly the same pattern of relationship. In other words, insurgencies or conflicts of whatever scale, the bigger they were, the less frequently they happened. So world wars are not anomalies, they are outliers along this continuity of relationship. But somebody asked me a while ago, well, does that mean that conflicts are inevitable? No, it doesn't. What it means is that underlying the appearance of physical reality, and on these complex systems, there are what's called attractors. And the attractors are dynamic, relational, informational basins, okay? So when we collectively buy into something, all of that consciousness buy-in goes into a basin of attraction. And so if we buy into separation, one behavior of that buying into separation is conflicts. If we buy into unity awareness, then that's a similar, exactly the same powerful or more powerful attractor basin. From that can emerge peace. So it's not that conflicts or anything is inevitable. It's just this is the way the appearance of reality emerges from deeper non-physical planes of not just experience, but intention and consciousness. You know, dear friend of mine, Lynn McTaggart, talks about the power of intention, and she spent years and years showing it evidentially. Well, the whole universe is the power of intention and the power of consciousness at deep levels. We find the same holographic, dynamic, informational patterns in ecosystems and human behaviors. One example, there was an analysis of 10,000 anonymous users of cell phones, mobile phones, over 3 months, fairly recently. And these people were using their mobile phones different times of day, for different durations, whether they were going to work or at home or whatever. And when all that information was put together, the patterns of usage were exactly the same as the informational patterns that connect ecosystems. Now, what I'm trying to show here is that the informational patterns that underlie what we call natural phenomena are no different from the patterns and the dynamical relations that underpin our collective behaviors. And that's really something to think about, because it shows that even as individuals and unique individuals, when we come together, we are also a collective consciousness, whether aware of it or not, and that collective consciousness plays out in dynamic relational patterns that are exactly the same as those through ecosystems. So the question then is, what information are we sharing with the world? You know, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. You know, we see what we do when we touch someone, but do we see what we do when we think negative thoughts about them? Or do we see what happens when we think positive, loving thoughts? I used to do dowsing workshops years ago, and I'd sit somebody at the end of a room, and the rest of the group would be at the other end of the room. And I'd douse their auras, and they'd be whatever, say that far from the person. I would never have a negative thought, but what I got was the rest of the group to just give them love. And their auras used to go to 2 to 3 times as expansive. You know, there's so much biomedical research now showing that when we feel love, we just literally open up, and when we feel fear, we just close down. So this is, you know, we're beginning to be able to see how this affects everything. And we're just at the beginning. We're just the baby steps of this. So as microcosmic co-creators, what is our choice? We're much more powerful. We're much, much, much more powerful than we think we are. And certainly the work that, you know, I've done over years, Lynn's done over many years, and many others, show that when we come together, that power is exponential. It's not just arithmetic, it is exponential. And what she's found is that in groups of 8, when those group of 8 people offer healing intention, loving intention to someone outside the group, not only is that person benefited, but there's a feedback. So for the people intending, there's a benefit. You know, there's so many social studies that show when we're kind, we feel that in ourselves. We expand. We feel better when that happens. So what are we doing? And from all of this, what this is showing is the profound level of interconnectedness, and that ultimately consciousness is what we and the whole world are. So what do we bring to the party? As I said, mind and consciousness isn't something we have. It's literally what we and the whole world are. So what we're going to do? Wake up? Hey! Can I have a cheer, please, for each of these? Wake up. Yay! Grow up. Yay! Clean up. Yay! Show up. Yay! Link up. Yay! And lift up. Yay! Woo! Thank you.